Friendship dynamics from episode 1 were flipped on their head in this wild episode 2 of Real Housewives of Orange County, season 16, titled Loose Lips and Lawsuits. Now, before we jump into the recap and our reactions, which I will read from the live chat as they come in, for those of you who are new, I am Nick Zangle, and thank you so much for being here. So, let's pick up right where last episode left off, with Noella and Nicole arriving to meet the girls together for the first time, including Gina and Emily, where Emily in her confessional says what I think most of us are thinking, in that it is weird that Nicole is arriving to the Dubrow household knowing she sued Terry before. Now, everyone in the cast will basically get a chance to share their take on this before the bomb gets dropped later in the episode. But next, we see Dr. Jen and Noella catching up, where we actually get confirmation that they do know each other through Bronwyn, which is what we speculated last episode, and they make small talk about Dr. Jen working and Noella not working, kind of making jokes with each other that Noella's work that day was getting out of bed and starting to get ready and put herself together for this event, and that was her work for the day. Now, in their confessionals, Noella and Jen both acknowledge their differences, where Dr. Jen says, well, we both breathe oxygen, trying to find something that they have in common. But also, a side note, I was trying to figure out who Dr. Jen sounds like, and I finally put my finger on it after racking my brain of all the housewives I've come across them that we know. And I finally figured out that she talks like Teddy Mellencamp from Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. And that's also why I accidentally almost said Beverly Hills at the beginning in my intro. But let me know if you had a similar thought as that in the chat. And let's keep one more thought before we keep going, is I actually like that the two new housewives are, at face value so far, polar opposites in a way, and can acknowledge and joke about it to each other's faces and just own who they are. But I have a feeling they will be finding something to bond over related to their marriages and their marriage woes very soon. Just want to check my audio really quick. Perfect. And let us keep going. So after everyone arrives, Heather herds everyone over to take a group picture with a photographer, and as they are walking over, Shannon says hi to her old friend Nicole James, formerly Weiss, as they take a 7-strong cast photo here, all friendly before the shit hits the fan. Now, in her confessional, Shannon says this isn't the Vavoom Pam Anderson lookalike that she met 16 years ago, but the only thing that's really the same is the skimpy dress. Now, everyone then moves to the next room, which is the porch where they're having drinks, where Heather invites Nicole and Dr. Jen to bang the gong, preceded by Heather's attempt at being edgy with a joke about double banging the gong. I'll let you interpret that how you wish. But Noella is on the other side of the porch, saying more bluntly how she actually felt the vibration from the gong in her vagina area. So there you go. So now they head back inside to the room with the food, catered by Nobu, which we saw Heather plan last episode, where Nicole and Shannon are catching up. Nicole says Heather asked her if she was the one that dated Kid Rock or waited in line for Sprinkles cupcakes, and she says, quote unquote, both. And Shannon and her all giggles, and Shannon's giggling to Nicole's face at the moment. But in her confessional, Shannon seems to think it is weird to be around her, knowing Nicole told Shannon she sued Terry 16 years ago when they were still friends. Shannon seems to think maybe Heather does know already and kind of got over it with Nicole over those 16 years. Think a lot of things changed, and maybe that's why they're friends now, but we will have to see how this unfolds more a little bit later. Now, as they are all grabbing food, Emily and Gina are whispering about Shannon, talking shit about them, but being nice to their face. Gina then says to Emily she really likes Heather. And at this point, Gina says clearly Nicole didn't actually sue Terry. At this point, she doesn't think that Nicole's the same person. But Nicole is standing right next to them when they're whispering. And as you see here, Nicole then kind of pokes her way into Gina and Emily talking, where Emily says, your boobs look great. Meanwhile, Gina in her confessional says, again, it feels like the Twilight Zone, because normally you don't stay friends with someone that you've sued. So Emily and Gina are now hearing Nicole talk about her boobs, and they are feeling each other's boobs. Like you see here, they're like poking each other, where Emily says, "Mine are real now." And Nicole kind of cryptically says, "Well, it has been a long journey for me to get to where I am today with these boobs. It wasn't a smooth journey, but it took 4.5 years to get to this point." We'll table that conversation for now. But Gina at this point says she still doesn't think and doesn't know if it was Terry for sure that Nicole had issues with her plastic surgery and boobs with. Now, I don't know about you, but I was very uncomfortable, as well as these women saying in their confessionals, watching this, knowing what we know about the lawsuit. So I can't imagine how uncomfortable Emily, Gina, Shannon, and Nicole were in this situation. But then again, Shannon and Nicole seem to think this wouldn't come out or wouldn't come up. And Gina and Emily still aren't sure if the story is even true. And of course, Dr. Jen, Noella, and Heather were not aware of the gossip either. So maybe we as viewers were actually probably the most stressed watching this as flies on the wall. But we will see how this all pans out in a few seconds. Also, I thought it was smart of Emily, likely putting her inner lawyer hat on, to compliment Nicole's breasts to see if she would offer up anything related to Terry. And it appears it worked, because Nicole was cautiously alluding to something going wrong, but clearly didn't want to offer up who was actually involved and who the doctor was. So now we have Shannon talking to Noella, and they are both bonding over going to the same healer in Laguna Niguel. Terry, Heather's husband, then makes a quick appearance and heads off to bed because he has an early surgery to do in the morning. Little does he know he will be coming back down very soon to address something, which we'll find out in a few seconds. Then we see Shannon cheersing to everyone to fun and to meeting new people, which she is excited about for now. Then Gina and Heather interact about both being from New York as they head to yet another room in the house. And Gina says in her confessional she has a hard time being in someone's home, participating, and knowing something that makes them look stupid, prompting Gina to pull Heather to the side to drop the bomb on her, blowing up the entire season already by completely changing every dynamic that we saw last episode and everything up to this point. So, bear with me as the scene unfolds in real time on multiple fronts at this party. I'm sure the camera crews and the production was kind of going crazy trying to follow all this, but they did a good job. So let's go into it. So as Gina is pulling Heather aside, they sit to talk, and Gina shares with Heather kind of what's been going on so far, meaning that Shannon didn't know at first if Nicole was the same Nicole she knew years ago. But even before that, the confirmation that they got with Heather at that lunch at Javier's, Shannon told Emily and Gina that a Nicole she knew had sued Terry before getting confirmation. Gina says to Heather the whole thing is so absurd, but in the event that it was true about the lawsuit and Heather didn't know, Gina thought it made Heather look silly going around telling everyone how great Nicole is, while everyone except Heather might know about this lawsuit. Meanwhile, in the other room, Nicole is sitting with Shannon, Emily, and Dr. Jen, where Emily asks Shannon in front of them, "Did you ever tell Heather?" in reference to the lawsuit, but not really saying explicitly. Shannon then looks at Emily and is like, "That is so not okay. Why are you bringing this up? I am not going to hurt anybody by bringing this up." And Emily says, "Well, I'm bringing it up because Gina is in the other room talking to Heather right now," kind of giving a kind of wink, hint at Shannon to be like, things are about to explode. This is about to come out, whether you like it or not. And then Shannon says, "Emily, I thought we had a pact to never speak on this." Then Dr. Jen is like cutting in like, "Can you tell us what's going on here? What are you talking about?" And Emily says to Shannon, "I told you I wouldn't tell, but you are the one that made it a thing by bringing it up in the first place." Shannon then, with encouragement from Emily saying, "You need to go tell your friend Heather," gets up and heads to the Gina and Heather powwow, where Gina is telling Heather, "I'm telling you now because I don't know Shannon's end goal with this information." Shannon storms Beador, then storms in and confesses to Heather the lawsuit info about Nicole was the reason she didn't think it was the same Nicole, because Shannon thought, why would Terry and Heather be friends with this girl, someone who has sued Terry? Heather then asks Shannon, are you really doing this right now? Gina says, I thought, let's just tell her. She said, and then she'll say there's nothing to it, and then we can all move on. Why keep this in, Shannon? But then Gina and Shannon get into it, and Gina calls out Shannon for always doing this, stirring the pot and trying to manipulate and whatnot, reiterating what Emily said of Shannon making this a thing by bringing it up in the first place. And Heather gets up and to go do something, which we will find out in a second what that was. But Shannon then brings up the promise they all made to not tell. And Gina pulls out a one-liner I enjoyed of her saying, Shannon, this isn't Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. And Gina says she didn't even know Heather when she learned of this information from her, and that she didn't know for sure if it pertained to Heather because they were still trying to figure out if it was the correct person that they were thinking of. And at the time, Shannon was still even trying to confirm it was the same Nicole. Now, Gina then defends herself, saying, it is ridiculous for you to try to pin this on me, Shannon. Now, meanwhile, Noella is looking on behind them in shock, and in her confessional calls Shannon an elder, meaning Gina should not be speaking to her elders that way, which is kind of a subtle dig at Shannon. But I guess that's why they played a game of guessing housewife ages on Watch What Happens Live After, which was both funny and kind of cringy. But anyways, Gina then heatedly walks off, leaving Shannon alone at the table, where Noella comes in to ask if Shannon is okay. Shannon says she is not okay and says to Noella, don't ever trust Gina. Now, some quick thoughts here so far. I actually think it was big of Gina to go tell Heather to her face, albeit not the best timing, which we'll revisit that at the end of the episode. But I also thought it was bad of Shannon to put her friends Gina and Emily and her quote-unquote friend Heather in this spot too. And also, I thought it was good on Emily for pushing her friend Shannon, to be honest. Which, to me, the only person I see here being a bad friend is Shannon. So we'll see how that pans out. But I also think Gina kind of wins the season so far already by putting not only Heather in the hot seat, while also putting Shannon in her place in one move, and kind of exposing Shannon for being messy and manipulative, which is something that she hasn't really been held accountable for like this up to this point. Now, my last thought before we keep going is that Gina's line about the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants is going to be, for me, one of the classic one-liners going forward in kind of housewife history. But I really think that she meant it as kind of a code for wake up, Shannon. Remember, this is a reality show, and we all fend for ourselves at the end of the day. So you had to know, Shannon, this would come out and get back to Heather as a returning cast member to the show and someone who's going to be kind of the star to revive the series. So Shannon had to know that this was going to come out. She can't be that dumb. But anyways, let's keep going. In the room Shannon was just in, Emily is filling in Nicole and Dr. Jen on what is going on. And it is interesting to see that another doctor, Dr. Jen, is hearing this, sitting next to a patient of Terry's, allegedly having a legal past with Terry, who's another doctor. Now, Gina comes into the room heated, repeating what she just told Shannon. And Nicole is sharing with Emily, Dr. Jen, and Gina that she feels it was actually a mistake to get into that lawsuit with Terry, and says that she was this young model pushed into a lawsuit by a lawyer, where Gina is kind of sitting there in disgust, kind of like, oh God, what is happening? And Emily asks for confirmation if it was Terry who was that doctor, and Nicole says yes. So Emily and Gina kind of look at each other like, oh, this is actually real. We thought this was fake. Now, Nicole is saying upon further questioning from Emily that she never discussed this with Terry or Heather. And Emily says she feels like Nicole should have cleared the air on that before becoming friends with Heather. Dr. Jen agrees with Emily, and in her confessional says that is one of the worst things you can do is sue your own doctor. Because she says your doctor is supposed to be there to protect you and help you. And obviously she would know because she's a doctor herself. She also says that she would not be having someone who sued her at her house for dinner. That's for sure. And I think that's a very logical, rational thought. Now, Emily then pushes Nicole on why she didn't tell Heather about the lawsuit as her friend, where Nicole then tries to shut that down, saying, you know what, I will be working that out with Heather, and continues by saying to Emily, when we need your opinion, we will ask for your opinion. Right now, we don't need it. I felt like she was channeling her inner Kim Richards there. She kind of had that same vibe. But anyways, Emily then says, okay, but I only brought it up because Shannon did. And then Nicole goes again saying, I will ask you for your opinion if I need it. And that is what appears to start triggering Emily to say, don't start saying these things to me when I've been nice to you this whole night. Then Nicole humorously tells Emily to sit down when she is already sitting down. Gina obviously notices that, and that irony is not lost upon her. But basically, Nicole's saying, I've only known you for a few minutes. Emily then says, I think you need to redirect this anger at Shannon. And Nicole almost calls Emily stupid at this point, but stops herself from saying that second syllable of the word stupid. She kind of goes, you're so stupid, and kind of just stops. But Emily is not stupid and picks up on that, taking her to the next level of angry towards Nicole, where then Nicole makes things worse again by telling Emily to go eat your sushi, bitch. And then Emily throws what apparently Nicole told her earlier of being uneducated and has only been a mom as an adult in Nicole's face, saying basically, you told me all this earlier and now you're going to call me stupid? Followed by Emily throwing an FU at Nicole as she walks away, calling Nicole trash and reiterating the no job and no education thing while pulling Gina away from the group with her saying, you're with me, come with me. Now Nicole, after Emily leaves, questions Emily's education from this reaction as she's sitting there with Dr. Jen, and Emily tells Gina in the hallway, F that tiny little bitch that looks just like me except I'm the better version of that. As Noella and Shannon are bug-eyed in shock hearing and seeing this happen in the room directly next to them. Dr. Jen is then left with Nicole trying to not make it worse, but also seems to be on Emily and Gina's side saying, she only called you trash after you came after her. And Nicole says, no, I'm not. I'm on a diet and I know how to shut my mouth, implying that Emily is heavier set and louder than her. Meanwhile, Gina has walked out the door with Emily, where Emily is still heated, saying she wants to fuck Nicole up, and they're there to kind of calm down. Now, before we move on, I want to say a few thoughts. I think Nicole coming after Emily was not smart of Nicole, considering Emily is a lawyer and has that combativeness in her already. And at this point, it does look like Nicole was trying to keep her friendship with Heather to stay on the show, and it might have backfired because of the friendship triangle of history between Heather, Shannon, and Nicole, plus the new friend dynamic of Heather related to Gina and Emily. Now, at first, I thought Emily throwing back in Nicole's face the fact that she wasn't educated or hasn't been employed outside the home was mean. But then again, if you call someone stupid after boasting about these two traits of yours just seconds ago, then you can expect her not to throw it back at you, especially if you do or don't know that she's a lawyer. And all of that, even though I believe a degree doesn't necessarily mean you are smart. Maybe in a certain field you're smart, but it doesn't mean you're like this genius. And also that I don't believe that being a mom isn't work. So I have a feeling that Emily's going to regret that she said that, because it's not going to make her look very good in my opinion. But amid all this, Shannon was walking over to Heather, who basically shuts her down at this point, saying, and we kind of break the fourth wall, saying to production, show's over, and she's yelling at the crew to put the cameras down and puts her hand over the lens of the camera, as you see here, and we see her go up the stairs saying, I'm leaving the show now. I'm kicking everyone out of my house. Clearly a voiceover, but we'll realize later why she was going upstairs. But Shannon is then confiding in Noella, saying she got loose-lipped after having a few drinks and thought she was telling something to people she could trust. Now, at what point does Shannon recognize her drinking leads to bad decision making, causing issues in her life? This came up at the last reunion where Gina and Emily were saying, sometimes your drinking is a problem. And it's just come up over the years, and maybe it's going to get to that point where Shannon finally wakes up. But anyways, in her confessional, Shannon says, who the F does Gina think she is, telling Heather who she just met. Noella then tells Shannon she thought it looked like an ambush, even though we saw clearly Shannon walked over to Heather and Emily, or Heather and Gina, but we'll probably see that dissected soon. So after the party moved out front to calm everyone down, Noella and Shannon are still in the kitchen, where Noella spots Heather's daughter, Max, and Noella turns right over to her to introduce herself and says, hey, I'm bisexual too, because Heather's daughter came out as bisexual recently. So clearly Noella at this point can let things roll off her back. And at this point, Noella seems to be the most normal out of all of them in this situation, but time will tell if she is the most normal overall. Now, Gina and Emily and Dr. Jen head back into the house after cooling off, and they're greeted by Noella, and all head over to Shannon in the kitchen with everyone else, where Shannon wants to know what happened, and Gina tries to shut down any further conversation about it in front of everyone because they didn't want to continue making a scene. As Emily says, she thought this was all made up, but it ended up all being true. Now in the kitchen, I wanted to point out two facial expressions in this one frame, which was the shock from Heather's friend here, who we saw. She was like an actress friend of Heather's that we saw on Heather's original run, reacting to what the heck is going on. And then we have Shannon here reacting to Emily, basically telling her to her face, we just figured out that all those lawsuit rumors are all true, and we confronted everyone, basically. And so these were kind of natural reactions, I thought, to everything going on. So now we have Terry being paraded downstairs by Heather, who it looks like that's what she was actually doing when going up the stairs, from their room upstairs to go meet Nicole in another room, where Terry says, are you Nicole Weiss? You sued me. Terry then learns Heather and her have been friends for over 6 years, and she didn't bring this up because the lawsuit was dropped and Nicole didn't think Terry did anything wrong. Now Nicole is getting emotional, saying she doesn't want to be in this position, as Terry is saying, it is okay. You dropped it, as they tried to make a joke about it that appears to have fallen flat with a clearly distraught Nicole, as they are counseling her like parents, a pattern for the Dubrows' treatment of some of their friends. Heather then says in her confessional it isn't a big deal. Doctors get sued all the time, and asks Nicole to stay to give her a fresh start. Now clearly Heather knew how serious this was and grabbed Terry right away to kind of squash it. But I think Nicole was probably more upset that this could jeopardize her time on the show, because she fell out with basically everyone in the cast in one night early on in filming besides Noella. So we'll see how that whole plays out. So now back in the kitchen, Noella says she senses a lot of feelings on both sides and thinks that things will be okay in the end. Some of the girls agree. But then Heather pulls Gina and Shannon aside, saying, I'm not mad at you for raising your voice. I'm mad at you for talking shit about my husband after I invited you into my home. Now, in my opinion, the best seasons are the ones where the husbands are involved, so I always love when the husbands are involved in the storyline, so this is a good sign for me. But because Heather continues on saying, because it doesn't exist in my world, I don't know about it. And we should actually shoot the messenger. Speaking of the messenger, Shannon, they only know because you told them. Then Shannon tries to kind of justify this to Heather, and Heather's not having any of it, so she kind of walks away and says, as she's walking in, the party is over. More on that in a second. But as she is saying goodbye to Emily, Nicole, and Gina, and says bye to the staff as she runs into Shannon in the hall again, where Shannon is trying to say she wasn't trying to hurt Heather, where Heather is scolding her as she is saying she is disappointed in Shannon because she thought they could actually be friends this time, and says, you are not trustworthy and not loyal because you just tried to explode my world. Good night. Reminiscent of a goodbye Kyle moment, and it kind of just ended there, and Shannon walked down the hallway by the long hotel-like hallway of the house to end the night. So this 16 plus minute opening scene, plus a commercial, plus it coming back, basically covering half an episode, finally comes to an end. And just some final thoughts on this party before we continue is I don't think Heather needed to end that party the way she did because of this incident. And I actually think that was kind of a production staged spin of this for dramatic effect from the producers, because Heather telling the staff in that scene where she's like, we won't be needing the entrees. Thank you so much for being here. They only showed Heather, and it kind of looked a little staged in the frame. And then the footage of the staff that we saw that was supposed to be in reaction to her telling them to kind of go home and pack up looked like footage from earlier in the evening and didn't look like they were actually talking to her. So maybe they did shut down filming really quick and they couldn't get any of the other footage of the staff cleaning up for the night. But then again, I say there was a camera guy there filming Heather saying this thing to the staff. So you think he would pan over really quick and show them cleaning up for the night. But also though, what makes me think that spin to the end of the night was staged was when she was saying bye to the few cast members, where Emily was hugging her saying, let's meet up for lunch and get to know each other a little better, and her hugging Nicole goodbye. Noella and Dr. Jen were still hanging out with the other guests, and maybe even Gina, in the kitchen with no indication of them leaving anytime soon. So it could have been just a way for them to get the cast out the door and kind of put a pin in this storyline to hash out later for kind of storyline and production reasons. So those are my suspicions on that whole party ending, but it definitely was wild to see unfold that quickly. So it is actually, I'm going to take a quick sip of water and then we will continue on. So it is now the next day, and Gina is driving her kids somewhere and kind of telling them that she had a wild night the night before at a party. Dr. Jen is in the office, and Heather is on her porch having a FaceTime chat with Emily, where Emily invites Heather to lunch with her and Gina to talk about what happened at the party. Shannon is then at her home FaceTiming Noella about what happened, thanking her for her support that night, and Shannon shares she doesn't feel completely alone knowing Noella is on her side right now. Shannon in her confessional says she shouldn't have said anything about the lawsuit, but is not going to put up with being painted as bringing this up maliciously. Heather and Terry are now debriefing the night of the party, saying he's been sued before and will again in the future, and paints this more as a misunderstanding. Hold on 1 second, I had to turn on my fan. Terry then asks Heather what would motivate Shannon to bring this news up now from decades ago. Heather says the only thing that makes sense for Shannon to bring this up is to hurt the Dubrows, because in every other scenario, it isn't any of her business. And Terry makes a good point to say Shannon might be harboring something from the past on them, where we then get a flashback to Shannon in earlier seasons with her and Heather, where there were rumors of the Dubrows trying to take down the Beadors at that infamous dinner party at Lizzie's Laguna Beach house many seasons ago. And they end the scene disappointed in the waste of food at a party that cost $36,000, according to Heather, to put on for 11 people. Now, I get that wasting any money or food or time is annoying, but I'm not convinced Terry and Heather are losing sleep over the $36,000 spent on the party, but maybe would be more mad at that the Nobu staff and other guests had to witness this mess and have it negatively impact their experience at their home. So next, we see Dr. Jen. We see another couple. This is kind of the couple ending to the episode. We see Dr. Jen out for dinner with her husband Ryne, who I thought his name was spelled R-Y-A-N, but it's actually R-Y-N-E, pronounced Ryne. And he has his chihuahua, Mr. Puppers, in hand at the table, and he tells her boobs look just enough out after she asks him if she has too much cleavage showing. She jokes that he looks good even though he is wearing clothes, but clarifies in her confessional that that's how she met him, shirtless and with the chihuahua in hand, and that the only thing that's changed is now he has a gold chain on while doing that. Dr. Jen is then trying to share her new business venture with Ryne, who is distracted by food. She then shares in her confessional she is more wanting to be building an empire, and he would rather be playing catch at the beach. She then brings up at the table her worry that her imbalance with work and home life is messing up her kids. And her husband says, well, that's who you are, so that should be okay. But they both seem to be wanting to have more balance after acknowledging that they both maybe harbor some resentment for the choices they made in their lives, of her being a career woman and him at the beginning raising their kids as kind of a stay-at-home dad and not having a career. Now, all I want to say in this scene was that this scene made me think of Ryne was channeling his inner Jill Zarin or Lisa Vanderpump with kind of the dog holding in his hand. But it does look like we are going to see how their marriage either improves from here or dissolves, and that's going to be their main storyline. So we will see what happens there. Now on to another couple, Shane and Emily, who are at the Orange Hill restaurant, which is another restaurant I've actually been to, and it has spectacular views from the top on a clear day after you drive up this windy road up to the top of the hill, and it actually is in Orange, or near Orange, California. So there you go. But we are reminded how Shane doesn't drink. Emily shares that they are at a great place in their marriage right now, as Shane jokes about ordering for her and jokes to order her a cheeseburger, and then she ends up ordering. But they talk about being surprised that they've actually made it to the 13 years of marriage and are now grateful for the tough times that they went through now that they are on the other side. Emily then says Shane being sick last year in the hospital with COVID was the first time she actually noticed her lack of faith in her life, where Shane has always been the one that's had a strong faith. And they share how their daughter Annabelle, who is the one we've seen over the years, is getting baptized and actually goes to the same church as Shane's two daughters from a previous marriage. Emily then opens up saying the one thing she can't give her kids is faith, and reminds us of what she shared in earlier seasons of when things get chaotic in her life as an adult. She kind of gets triggered by her structureless, chaotic childhood. And then she says that she only wants to give her children faith, peace, and stability so that they have something to hold on to during the tough times, which is what she feels she lacked last year during those tough times. Now, all I want to say to this was that it appears the Emily we saw earlier in this episode reacting to Nicole at Heather's, and the first season incident between Emily and Kelly, when Kelly kind of called Shane a little dork or something at that first party they were all at, where she threatened to kind of go after Kelly and kill her. Those seem to be instances where she was triggered by that kind of chaos and not being in control, where someone else is kind of doing things to her. So I thought that was, I like to see her open about that and being honest about it. But anyways, we are now in the final scene of this wild episode, with Heather meeting Gina and Emily for lunch to work out what happened at her dinner party the other night. Gina then jumps right in saying she feels awful about messing up the party by bringing this up. And Emily says she feels horrible as well for pushing Shannon to be open that night as well. Gina then shares in hindsight she shouldn't have said something then, but then shares with Heather why she felt the need to say something and what triggered her, because she says when she learned of her husband's cheating years ago, it was after she got home from a barbecue where the mistress was present and everyone at the barbecue knew except for Gina. Heather then is responsive and understands now why it happened the way it did, and also gets emotional saying, I love my family and this was an attempted attack on it. And it looks like Gina and Heather both see each other, saying that they both clearly hear each other and kind of understand each other and aren't holding it against each other. Where Heather seems to be okay moving on now that they've all kind of had their peace. Then Heather attempts to try to explain to Gina and Emily why she thinks Shannon would even bring this up. And Heather says success breeds contempt, implying maybe Shannon is jealous of her and Terry in their life because she can't think of anything else. And Gina then says Shannon is involving people she should not and not involving the people that she should, followed by Heather telling the girls that Shannon told her she thought she could trust Gina and Emily, But Heather says it didn't make sense because apparently Shannon told Heather before that to not trust Emily and Gina and that they were manipulative. So it didn't add up. And now that everyone is kind of comparing notes about what's going on, Shannon appears to not be looking so good. So that wraps up this episode, episode 2, Loose Lips and Lawsuits from Real Housewives of Orange County, season 16. Let me know what you think in the comments, wherever you are tuning in from or are able to comment. And before you leave, make sure to do whatever you have to do to show love for this episode, whatever platform you are on, and to make sure you don't miss another one by subscribing or doing whatever the equivalent is on whatever platform you are watching or listening from. And with that said, I'm going to hold off. I had a few other thoughts about this whole storyline, but I think I'm going to hold off on them for a little bit. But with that said, I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and I will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.